At Christmas dinner, my ex-husband mocked my new fiancé in front of everyone. He said, "You replaced me with a janitor. That's trash." My kids laughed. I stood up to leave. But when my fiancé arrived with a brand new Bentley, pointed his finger to my ex-husband and said 3 words. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My hands trembled as I stood outside Porter's front door, clutching the bottle of wine I'd brought for Christmas dinner. 62 years old, and I still felt like that nervous young bride I'd been nearly 40 years ago whenever I had to face my ex-husband's scrutiny. The December wind cut through my wool coat, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I should have stayed home, should have made some excuse about feeling sick or having other plans. But when my eldest called 3 weeks ago and actually sounded like he wanted me there, something in my chest had loosened with hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe after 4 years of cold shoulders and missed calls, my children were finally ready to accept that their mother deserved happiness too. The mahogany door swung open before I could knock. Porter stood there in his expensive charcoal suit, the same one he'd worn to court during our divorce proceedings. Even at 65, he still carried himself like the successful attorney he was. Shoulders back, jaw set in that way that had once made me feel protected, but now just looked arrogant. Francine. His tone was neutral, but I caught the slight curl of his lip as his eyes traveled from my department store dress to my sensible shoes. "You're early." Traffic was lighter than expected. I held up the wine, a $20 bottle that had felt adequate when I'd picked it out, but now seemed pathetic next to the crystal chandelier glittering behind him. "Merry Christmas, Porter." He stepped aside without taking the wine, and I walked into the house that had been mine for 35 years. Everything looked exactly the same. The marble floors that I'd spent countless hours mopping. The antique furniture I'd carefully polished every week. The family photos lining the hallway. Photos that had been carefully edited after our divorce to exclude me entirely. Voices drifted from the dining room. And my stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. All 3 of my children were here. Michael, 37 and successful in his father's firm. Sarah, 34 and married to a banker. And David, 32 and still finding himself with Porter's financial support. They'd all taken sides during the divorce, and it hadn't been mine. "Mom." Sarah appeared in the doorway, her smile bright, but not quite reaching her eyes. She'd inherited Porter's ability to perform warmth while keeping her true feelings carefully hidden. "You made it." She hugged me briefly, the kind of embrace reserved for distant relatives, then stepped back to examine my outfit. "That's a nice dress. Is it new? I got it last month." I didn't mention that it came from the clearance rack at Nordstrom Rack, purchased with part of the $800 Porter was required to pay me monthly in alimony. Money that barely covered my rent in the tiny 1-bedroom apartment I'd moved to after losing everything else. "Where's your boyfriend?" This from Michael, who'd appeared behind Sarah with a scotch in his hand and skepticism written across his features. He'd always been Porter's favorite, molded in his father's image of masculine success and conservative values. "His name is Donovan, and he'll be joining us later. He had to finish some work obligations first." I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, the way Porter had taught me to speak at his firm's social events all those years ago. David laughed from somewhere behind me. "Work obligations on Christmas." What kind of job requires that heat crept up my neck, but I forced myself to turn and face my youngest son. He stood near the bar, mixing himself a drink with the casual confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He runs a cleaning service. Sometimes emergency calls come in on holidays. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my children exchange glances, the kind of wordless communication they'd perfected during family dinners when they were teenagers, usually right before ganging up on me about some perceived failure as a mother. A cleaning service. Porter's voice carried from the kitchen doorway where he'd apparently been listening to our conversation. How entrepreneurial. The word dripped with condescension, and I felt that familiar shrinking sensation in my chest. The same feeling I'd had countless times during our marriage, when Porter would use his lawyer's skills to make me feel stupid for having opinions different from his. "He's a good man," I said quietly, hating how defensive I sounded. "He treats me with respect and kindness, unlike some people." I wanted to add, but bit my tongue. Starting a fight wouldn't accomplish anything except giving them more ammunition to use against me. We moved into the dining room, where the table was set with the china that had been my grandmother's, but somehow became Porter's in the divorce settlement. I took the seat that had obviously been designated for me at the far end of the table, as removed from the family cluster as possible, without actually sitting in another room. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries. Michael talked about a case he'd won. Sarah discussed her children's achievements in private school. David mentioned his latest business idea that Porter was considering funding. I listened and smiled and tried to contribute when appropriate, but mostly I felt like a stranger observing someone else's family gathering. "So, Mom," Sarah said as we finished the main course, "tell us more about this Donovan. How did you meet him?" The question sounded innocent enough, but I caught the glance she exchanged with her brothers. They were setting up for something, and my defenses automatically went up. "We met at the grocery store," I said carefully. I was having trouble loading a heavy bag into my car, and he offered to help. "How romantic," David said with a smirk. A real knight in shining armor. Actually, he was coming off a job, so his uniform was a bit dirty. But yes, he was very kind. Uniform. Michael leaned forward with interest. "What company does he work for?" "He owns his own business." I emphasized the word owns, hoping to forestall some of the mockery I could see building in their expressions. "It's called Superior Cleaning Services." Superior Porter repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting name. I wonder if their work lives up to it." Something cold settled in my stomach. There was a tone in his voice I recognized from our marriage. The one that meant he knew something I didn't and was enjoying the power imbalance. "What time is he supposed to arrive?" Sarah asked, checking her expensive watch. "Dinner's almost over." "He said he'd be here by 7:30. I glanced at my own watch, a simple Timex that had replaced the jewelry Porter had reclaimed during the divorce. It was nearly 8 o'clock. "Maybe he got lost," Michael suggested with false sympathy. "I imagine he's not used to this neighborhood." The words stung because they were probably true. Porter's house sat in one of the most exclusive areas of the city. The kind of place where a cleaning service truck might look out of place among the luxury cars and manicured lawns. Or maybe he's having second thoughts about meeting the family. David added, "Some people get intimidated by success." That was the final straw. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I think I should go." This was clearly a mistake. "Oh, come on, Francine," Porter said, with the same tone he'd used to dismiss my concerns during our marriage. "Don't be so sensitive. The boys are just having a little fun." "Fun?" I turned to face him, feeling 40 years of suppressed anger bubbling to the surface. "Making jokes about the man I care about is fun. We're just looking out for you," Sarah said with manufactured concern. "You have to admit it's concerning that at your age you've ended up with someone so different from what you're used to." Different from Porter. She meant different from the lifestyle I'd lost when I'd finally found the courage to leave a marriage that had been slowly killing my spirit for decades. "You don't know anything about him," I said quietly, grabbing my purse from the sideboard. "You don't know anything about what makes me happy. We know you deserve better than some janitor who can't even show up on time," Michael said, with the casual cruelty that seemed to come naturally to all of Porter's children. The word janitor hung in the air like a slap. Not that there was anything wrong with honest work, but the way he said it with such disdain, such superiority, made it clear what he thought of both Donovan and my judgment. "He's not a janitor," I began, but Porter's laughter cut me off. "Cleaning service janitor. What's the difference, really?" He stood up too, his height giving him the physical advantage he'd always used to intimidate me. You replaced me with someone who scrubs toilets for a living. Francine, how do you think that makes our children feel? The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. My children watched the exchange with the same fascination they'd had as kids when Porter would lecture me about household management or proper behavior at social events. You want to know what I think? Porter continued, his voice taking on the courtroom tone that had won him so many cases. I think you're having some kind of midlife crisis. I think you're so desperate for attention that you'll take it from anyone, even if he's completely beneath you. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of people who would see my emotion as proof of weakness rather than humanity. You don't get to judge my choices anymore, I managed to say, though my voice shook with the effort of staying calm. You lost that right when you decided our marriage vows meant nothing. Here we go again, David muttered, rolling his eyes. Mom's greatest hits album. The casual dismissal of my pain. Pain they'd all witnessed, but chosen to ignore, was somehow worse than Porter's direct cruelty. These were my children. People I'd sacrificed everything to raise and protect, and they treated my heartbreak like an inconvenience. I'm leaving, I said, heading toward the front door. Good. Michael called after me. Maybe next time you'll think twice before bringing your charity case around our family. I was almost to the door when the sound of a car engine made me freeze. Through the front window, I could see headlights pulling into the driveway. Not the old pickup truck I'd expected, but something sleek and expensive. Well, well, Porter said, moving to look out the window beside me. Looks like your janitor finally decided to show up. But as the car came to a stop under the porch lights, I saw something that made no sense at all. Donovan was getting out of a brand new Bentley, the kind of car that cost more than I'd made in 2 years at the catering business I'd lost in the divorce. He walked toward the house with his usual confident stride. But something was different about him tonight. Gone was the casual work clothes I was used to seeing him in. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly alimony payment. The front door opened before he could knock, and suddenly he was standing in Porter's foyer, his presence seeming to fill the entire space. But it wasn't just his physical presence. There was something else, something I'd never seen before. Authority. Sorry I'm late, he said, his voice carrying an undertone I didn't recognize. His eyes found mine across the room, and he smiled with a warmth that made my heart skip. Traffic was heavier than expected. Then he turned to face Porter, and everything changed. The silence in Porter's foyer stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Donovan stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, and for a moment I wondered if I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the man in work clothes who'd helped me carry groceries, who'd patiently taught me how to change a tire, who'd held my hand through panic attacks when Porter's lawyer had threatened to take what little I had left. Donovan, Porter said, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he extended his hand with practiced professionalism. I'm Porter Henley, Francine's ex-husband. Donovan looked at the offered hand for a long moment before taking it. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Henley. Something in his tone made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of someone who held all the cards and knew it. Beautiful home. Donovan continued, his gaze moving past Porter to take in the marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the expensive artwork lining the walls. Very impressive. Though I have to say, the office building where we've met before has more character. Porter's face went blank with confusion. Office building? I'm sorry, I don't think we've met before, haven't we? Donovan's smile was pleasant, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath it. Henley Morrison and Associates downtown, 42nd floor. You've walked past me in the hallways countless times. My stomach dropped as understanding began to dawn. Porter's law firm was housed in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city, the kind of place where cleaning crews worked after hours when the important people had gone home. The cleaning crew, Porter said slowly, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his mind. You're part of the team that services our building. Not part of it, Donovan corrected mildly. I own it. The words landed like a physical blow. Michael's scotch glass slipped in his hand, though he managed to catch it before it fell. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. David, for once in his life, was completely speechless. But it was Porter's reaction that fascinated me most. All the color had drained from his face, leaving him looking older than his 65 years. His lawyer's composure was cracking, revealing something I'd rarely seen during our marriage. Genuine uncertainty. You own Superior Cleaning Services, Porter, said carefully, as if testing the words. Among other things, yes. Donovan moved further into the room, and I noticed how everyone seemed to unconsciously step aside to make space for him. We have the contract for your building and several others downtown. I believe your firm pays us approximately $200,000 annually for our services. The number hung in the air like a revelation. $200,000. That was more than twice what Porter paid me in alimony for an entire year. And apparently, it was just one contract for Donovan's business. But you, Porter, struggled to find his footing. I've seen you working mopping floors, emptying trash cans. I like to stay involved in the day-to-day operations, Donovan replied with the same mild tone. It's important to understand your business from the ground up. Plus, it gives me valuable insights into the companies we service. The implied threat in those words was subtle but unmistakable. How many conversations had Donovan overheard while emptying waste baskets in Porter's office? How many confidential documents had he seen in the trash? This is quite a surprise. Sarah managed her social training kicking in as she tried to process this new information. We had no idea about your success. Francine doesn't like to brag about my business, Donovan said, his eyes finding mine across the room. She fell in love with the man, not the bank account. Unlike some people, she values character over net worth. The barb was aimed directly at Porter, and everyone in the room knew it. My ex-husband's face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. If you own the cleaning company, Michael said, his voice tight with the same disbelief I was feeling, then why do you still work on the crews yourself? Donovan turned to face my eldest son, and I saw something shift in his expression. The pleasant mask slipped just enough to reveal something harder underneath. Your father never bothered to learn my name, he said simply. 4 years, I've been cleaning his office, and he's never once acknowledged my existence. He treats all the cleaning staff like they're invisible, like they're somehow less human than he is. Porter's flush deepened. That's not true. I'm perfectly professional with all the service staff. Professional? Donovan's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that what you call it when you leave messes on purpose to see how quickly they get cleaned up? Or when you hold important meetings in the conference room, knowing the cleaning crew is trying to work around you? Or when you make jokes about the help to your colleagues while we're standing right there? Each accusation hit like a physical blow. I'd lived with Porter for 35 years. I knew exactly the kind of casual cruelty Donovan was describing. The way my ex-husband treated anyone he perceived as beneath his social status had been a constant source of tension between us during our marriage. I think there's been some misunderstanding, Porter said, his lawyer instincts finally kicking in as he tried to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should start over. Why don't we all sit down? And actually, Donovan interrupted, reaching into his jacket pocket. I have something for you. He pulled out an envelope and held it toward Porter. My ex-husband took it with obvious reluctance, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. What is this? Porter asked, though I could tell from his expression that he already knew. Termination of contract, Donovan said pleasantly. Effective January 1st, Superior Cleaning Services will no longer be providing services to Henley Morrison and Associates. The silence that followed was absolute. Porter stared at the document as if he could make the words change through sheer force of will. "You can't do this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Actually, I can. The contract includes a 30-day cancellation clause for either party. I'm invoking it." "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice high with panic. She was married to a banker. She understood exactly what losing a contract worth $200,000 would mean to Porter's firm. Donovan looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Because your father has spent 4 years treating my employees with disrespect and contempt. Because he believes that paying for a service gives him the right to demean the people who provide it. And because I'm tired of watching good, hard-working people be treated like they're worthless." He turned back to Porter and his voice hardened. "But mostly because of what he put your mother through. I've heard the stories, Mr. Henley. I know about the emotional abuse, the financial control, the way he systematically destroyed her self-worth over the course of their marriage." My heart stopped. I'd never told Donovan about the worst parts of my marriage to Porter. How had he known I know about the catering business? He forced her to shut down. Donovan continued, his voice steady and implacable. "I know about the friends he drove away with his controlling behavior. I know about the way he convinced her that she was worthless, that she was lucky to have him, that no one else would ever want her." Porter's face had gone from red to white, his breathing shallow and rapid. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Donovan's smile was razor sharp now. "I know that you told her she was too stupid to manage money, then hid assets during the divorce to make sure she got as little as possible. I know that you turned your children against her by painting her as the villain in your marriage's failure. I know that you've spent the last 4 years trying to make her feel small and worthless every chance you get." Each word was like a hammer blow, and I watched my ex-husband crumble under the weight of them. But what shocked me more was the look on my children's faces. For the first time in years, they were looking at their father with something approaching doubt. "Those are serious accusations," Michael said carefully, his lawyer training evident in his measured tone. "They're not accusations," Donovan replied calmly. "They're facts, and they're going to have consequences." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a business card, which he handed to Porter with deliberate ceremony. "Donovan Mitchell," he said, as Porter read the card with growing horror, "CEO and founder of Mitchell Enterprises. We own 17 commercial cleaning companies across 3 states, 4 office buildings downtown, and a significant stake in several other local businesses." The name Mitchell Enterprises hit the room like a bomb. Even I recognized it from the business section of the newspaper, though I'd never connected it to my quiet, humble boyfriend who drove an old pickup truck and wore work clothes covered in cleaning solution stains. "Your worth," David began, then stopped, apparently unable to finish the sentence. "The exact number isn't important," Donovan said with a slight shrug. "What matters is that I have enough influence in this city to make life very difficult for people who mistreat others." Porter looked like he might be sick. "What do you want?" "I want you to treat Francine with the respect she deserves. I want you to stop poisoning your children against her. And I want you to acknowledge that the way you treated her during your marriage was wrong. And if I don't," Donovan's smile was cold now, all pretense of pleasantness gone, "then you'll discover just how much influence I really have in this city's business community." He turned to me, then his expression immediately softening. "I'm sorry I'm so late, sweetheart. I had some business to finish up before I could get away." I stared at this man I thought I knew. This person who had apparently been hiding a fortune while helping me clip coupons and shop at thrift stores. "Donovan, I don't understand. If you're wealthy, why didn't you tell me? Why let me worry about money? About whether I could afford dinner at a restaurant?" His face filled with such genuine sadness that my anger began to melt before it could fully form. "Because I needed to know that you loved me for who I am, not what I have. I needed to know that you wouldn't change, wouldn't become someone different if you knew about the money." He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. You've been hurt so badly by people who only valued you for what you could give them. I couldn't bear the thought of becoming another person who saw you as an asset instead of a woman. But all this time, I've been worrying about being a burden to you, about whether I could contribute enough to a relationship. You contribute everything that matters, he said firmly. Your kindness, your strength, your incredible ability to find joy despite everything you've been through. That's worth more than all the money in the world. Around us, my family stood in stunned silence, trying to process this complete reversal of everything they thought they knew. The man they'd mocked as beneath me was apparently more successful than any of them. The relationship they dismissed as pathetic was built on a foundation stronger than anything Porter and I had ever shared. But as I looked into Donovan's eyes, I realized this was only the beginning. There was something else there. Something he hadn't told me yet. And judging by the way Porter was still staring at that business card with growing horror, my ex-husband was starting to figure out what it might be. The grandfather clock in Porter's hallway chimed 8:30, its deep tones cutting through the suffocating silence that had settled over the room. I watched my ex-husband's face cycle through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. Confusion, disbelief, growing panic, and finally, a kind of sick understanding that made my stomach twist with something that felt disturbingly like satisfaction. Mitchell Enterprises. Porter whispered, still staring at the business card as if it might spontaneously combust in his hands. You're the Mitchell who bought the Hartwell building last month, among others. Donovan replied with that same mild tone that I was beginning to recognize as dangerous. We've been quietly acquiring properties downtown for the past 5 years. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when people don't see you as a threat. Michael stepped forward, his lawyer instincts finally overriding his shock. What exactly are you implying, Mr. Mitchell? I'm not implying anything, Donovan said, turning to face my eldest son with a smile that never reached his eyes. I'm stating facts. Your father's firm has a lease that comes up for renewal in 6 months. As of today, that renewal is no longer guaranteed. The color drained from Michael's face. Porter's law firm occupied prime real estate in the heart of the financial district space that had been grandfathered in at below market rates due to a long-term lease negotiated 15 years ago. Losing that location would mean either paying triple the rent elsewhere or moving to a less prestigious address. Both options that would significantly impact the firm's bottom line and reputation. You can't do that, Sarah said, her voice shrill with panic. There are legal protections for tenants' lease agreements, all of which I'm intimately familiar with. Donovan interrupted smoothly. Your husband works at First National, doesn't he? I'm sure he's explained how commercial real estate works. When a lease expires, the landlord has every right to choose not to renew, especially if the tenant has been problematic. Problematic, how David demanded, though he looked like he already dreaded the answer. Donovan reached into his jacket pocket again, a gesture that was starting to make the entire family flinch, and pulled out a small digital recorder. Your father has been very vocal about his opinions regarding the cleaning staff, he said, setting the device on Porter's dining room table, particularly about their intelligence, their worth as human beings, and what he perceives as their proper place in society. He pressed play, and Porter's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably cruel. I don't know why we pay these people so much. Any idiot can push a mop around. Half of them probably can't even read the cleaning supply labels. The recording continued with Porter's laughter and the voice of one of his law partners joining in. At least they know their place, unlike some people's ex-wives who think they deserve more than they're worth. Speaking of which, did you see that Francine is dating someone new, some janitor she picked up God knows where? I suppose it's fitting. Trash attracting trash. The silence that followed the recording was deafening. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach hearing my ex-husband's casual cruelty laid bare for everyone to witness. But what hurt more was seeing the expressions on my children's faces. Not shame or outrage on my behalf, but embarrassment at being caught. "Dad," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "That was taken out of context," Porter said quickly, his lawyer training kicking in as he tried to minimize the damage. "It was just locker room talk, harmless conversation between colleagues." "There are 6 hours of recordings," Donovan interrupted calmly. "From different days, different conversations, all equally charming." He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each of my children in turn. "Your father has spent years treating people with disrespect and contempt, believing that his position insulated him from consequences. He was wrong." "What do you want?" Porter asked again, but this time his voice cracked with desperation. "I want several things," Donovan replied, moving to stand beside me. The warmth of his presence was comforting, but there was steel in his voice that sent shivers down my spine. "First, I want a formal apology to Francine for the years of emotional abuse and financial manipulation you subjected her to during your marriage." "I never abused anyone," Porter protested weakly. "Really?" Donovan's eyebrows rose. "Would you like me to play the recording where you describe how you deliberately tanked her catering business by spreading lies about food poisoning at one of her events? Or perhaps the one where you explain to your partner how you hid assets in your mother's name to avoid paying fair alimony?" My niece nearly gave out. The catering business had been my dream, my one attempt at independence during our marriage. When several clients canned after reports of illness at a wedding I'd catered, I'd blamed myself, assumed I'd somehow made a mistake. To learn that Porter had orchestrated its destruction felt like being stabbed with a rusty blade. You recorded conversations in his office. Michael asked, his voice tight with legal implications. "Actually, most of these were recorded in common areas. The break room, the elevator, the lobby," Donovan replied. "All perfectly legal in a one-party consent state, especially when the conversations involve admissions of fraud and deliberate business interference." Porter swayed slightly on his feet. "You're talking about things that happened years ago. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to all of them." Donovan finished smoothly. "Some of the financial manipulations are recent enough to still be actionable, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm not here to destroy you, Porter, though I certainly could. I'm here to ensure that you finally face consequences for your actions." He turned to address my children directly. "Your father has painted your mother as the villain in your family's story for years. He's convinced you that she was selfish, demanding, unreasonable. But the truth is that she was trapped in a marriage with a man who systematically destroyed her self-worth and then punished her for trying to escape." "That's not how we remember it," David said. But his voice lacked conviction. "Of course it isn't," Donovan replied gently. "You were children. You saw what he wanted you to see. But you're adults now, capable of understanding that relationships are complex and that sometimes the people we love are also capable of terrible cruelty." He reached into his jacket one more time and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "These are bank statements, canceled checks, and financial documents spanning the last 10 years of your parents' marriage. They show a pattern of financial control and manipulation that would make any family court judge sick to their stomach." He handed the envelope to Sarah, who took it with trembling hands. "Your mother earned money through her catering business and part-time work at the country club. Your father deposited those earnings into accounts she didn't know about, then told her they couldn't afford things she wanted. Things like family vacations that included her or clothes that weren't from discount stores. He spent her earnings on gifts for his secretary, Donovan, continued relentlessly. The same secretary he was having an affair with for the last 8 years of your marriage. The same woman he's planning to marry next month." That last piece of information hit like a physical blow. Porter was getting remarried. None of us had known. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Hurt that I was apparently the last to know. Relief that I was no longer his target, and a deep sadness for the woman who would become his next victim. "Stop," Porter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just stop. I'm almost finished," Donovan replied with infinite patience. "The point I'm making is that your mother survived 20 years of psychological and financial abuse, found the courage to leave, and has spent the last 4 years rebuilding her life from nothing. She deserves your respect, not your contempt. She deserves your love, not your judgment." He looked at each of my children in turn, his expression serious but not unkind. "You have a choice to make. You can continue believing your father's version of events. Continue treating your mother like she's somehow less worthy of happiness than the rest of you. Or you can open your eyes to the truth and start working to repair the relationship that his lies have damaged. And if we choose wrong," Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Donovan's smile was cold. "Then you'll discover that your mother isn't the only person in this room with influence and resources. Your father's firm depends on referrals from other attorneys, contracts with corporations, and maintaining a reputation for professionalism and integrity. All of those things can disappear very quickly when the right people start asking the right questions." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Porter looked like he might collapse, his face gray and sweaty despite the December chill coming through the windows. "This isn't over," he said finally, but the words carried no conviction. "You're absolutely right," Donovan agreed pleasantly. "It's not over until Francine receives the apology and respect she deserves, until your children understand the truth about their childhood, and until you start making amends for the damage you've caused." He turned to me, his expression softening immediately. "Are you ready to go home, sweetheart?" I looked around the room one last time, at the house I'd once called home, at the family I'd tried so hard to please, at the man who'd spent decades convincing me I was worthless. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel small in their presence. I didn't feel like I needed to apologize for existing or justify my choices. "Yes," I said, taking Donovan's offered arm. "I'm ready." As we walked toward the front door, I heard Sarah call out behind us, "Mom, wait." I turned, hoping against hope that my only daughter might finally be ready to see me as something other than a disappointment. The envelope, she said, holding up the financial documents Donovan had given her. "Are these really from Dad's accounts?" Every page, Donovan confirmed, legally obtained through discovery during the divorce proceedings, though your mother never saw them at the time. Her attorney was less than aggressive in pursuing what she was owed. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out the top document. As she read, her face went white, then red, then white again. "Dad," she whispered, looking at Porter with something approaching horror. "This shows a transfer of $47,000 to an account in Jennifer's name on Mom's birthday." Jennifer Porter's secretary, soon to be his new wife. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of David muttering a string of profanities under his breath. Michael had gone very still, his lawyer's mind probably calculating exactly how much trouble his father was in if these documents ever saw the inside of a courtroom. "We need to talk," Sarah said to Porter, her voice shaking with anger. "We need to have a very long conversation about what really happened in this family." But I didn't stay to watch that conversation unfold. I had wasted enough years waiting for my children to choose me over their father's lies. Tonight, I was choosing myself. As Donovan and I walked to his Bentley, a car that apparently belonged to him, not rented for the evening, as I'd assumed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt powerful. The leather seats of the Bentley were buttersoft against my back as Donovan drove through the quiet streets of the city. Christmas lights twinkled in windows we passed. But inside the car, the silence felt heavy with unspoken questions. I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar neighborhoods blur by, trying to process everything that had just happened. "You're angry with me," Donovan said finally, his voice careful and measured. I turned to study his profile in the dim dashboard light. Even now, after seeing him command that room like he owned it, which apparently he did, There was something gentle about the way he held himself, something that had drawn me to him from that first day in the grocery store parking lot. "I'm not angry," I said slowly, testing the truth of the words as I spoke them. "I'm confused. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm not angry." We stopped at a red light, and he turned to look at me directly. "What are you feeling?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me with surprising force. When was the last time someone had asked what I was feeling and genuinely wanted to know the answer? When was the last time my emotions had mattered to anyone? "I feel like I don't know anything about my own life," I admitted. "I thought I was dating a sweet man who worked in cleaning services. I thought I was struggling to make ends meet on $800 a month in alimony. I thought my family was right about me being a burden, someone who couldn't take care of herself." The light turned green, but Donovan didn't immediately drive forward. "And now I find out that the man I love owns half the city. And apparently my ex-husband has been even more cruel than I realized. And my children might finally be seeing their father for who he really is." I laughed, but it came out shaky and uncertain. "I feel like Alice falling down the rabbit hole." Donovan reached over and took my hand, his thumb brushing gently across my knuckles. "I know this is a lot. I never intended for it to come out like this." "How did you intend for it to come out?" He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he chose his words carefully. "I was hoping I'd never have to reveal any of it. I was hoping that your family would eventually come around, that Porter would leave you alone, that you could heal without having to relive all the damage he caused." But that wasn't happening. "No," he said softly. "It wasn't. And watching them hurt you over and over again, watching you blame yourself for their cruelty, I couldn't stand it anymore." He turned into the parking lot of my apartment complex, but instead of heading toward my building, he parked near the small lake at the center of the property. The water reflected the Christmas lights strung along the walking path, creating fractured stars on the dark surface. "There's more you need to know," he said, turning off the engine. "About how we met, about what I've been doing behind the scenes." My stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "More secrets, more truths," he corrected gently. "Things I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid of how you'd react." I thought about Porter's lies, his manipulation, the way he'd controlled information to control me. But when I looked at Donovan, I didn't see that same calculating coldness in his eyes. I saw a fear that I might not understand, might not forgive, might walk away. "Tell me," I said. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles went white. "We didn't meet by accident at the grocery store." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'd been watching you for weeks. Before that day, following your routine, learning your schedule, waiting for an opportunity to approach you in a way that would seem natural." I pulled my hand away from his, my heart starting to race. "You were stalking me." "No," he said quickly, turning to face me fully. "Not stalking, investigating. There's a difference. Investigating me." "Why?" My voice was rising, and I could hear the edge of panic creeping in. "Not you," he said firmly. "Porter. I was investigating Porter, and you were caught in the web of his damage." I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. "I don't understand." Donovan looked out at the lake for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy, with something that sounded like old pain. 4 years ago, my cleaning company bid on the contract for Porter's building. We were a smaller operation then, but we offered competitive rates and excellent service. Porter was part of the building management committee that reviewed our proposal. He paused, his jaw tightening. We didn't get the contract. Instead, it went to a company that bid significantly higher, but happened to be owned by the brother of one of Porter's law partners. Classic nepotism. The kind of thing that happens in business all the time. That doesn't seem like enough reason to. It wasn't just about the contract he interrupted. It was about what Porter said during the committee meeting. One of my employees had a friend who worked in the building's administrative office. She heard the discussion. He turned to look at me again, and I saw anger flickering in his eyes. Not at me, but at the memory he was reliving. Porter argued against hiring us specifically because my company employed what he called undesirable elements. He was referring to the fact that several of my workers were formerly incarcerated individuals who were trying to rebuild their lives, or immigrants who were working multiple jobs to support their families. My heart sank. It was exactly the kind of thing Porter would say, the kind of casual prejudice he'd displayed throughout our marriage, but that I'd learned to overlook or rationalize. He said, Donovan continued, his voice deadly quiet, that people like that couldn't be trusted around valuable property or confidential information. He said they were probably criminals anyway, and that hiring them would reflect poorly on the building's reputation. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. Donovan, I'm so sorry. That's horrible, but I don't understand what it has to do with me. I started researching him after that. Donovan said, I wanted to understand what kind of man could be so casually cruel to people who were just trying to work and survive. What I found was a pattern of behavior stretching back decades. Discrimination lawsuits that were quietly settled, complaints from former employees about hostile work environment, rumors about inappropriate relationships with subordinates. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a different envelope, this one worn and creased from handling. But what really caught my attention was this. I took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 3 years ago. A small article about a charity auction to benefit women leaving abusive relationships. There, in a group photo of volunteers, was my face. You were volunteering at the women's shelter, Donovan said softly, helping other abuse survivors. And I realized that Porter's ex-wife wasn't just collateral damage in his pattern of cruelty. You were a survivor. Tears started to blur my vision as memories flooded back. The shelter had been my lifeline after the divorce, the place where I'd finally understood that what I'd experienced wasn't normal, wasn't my fault. Volunteering there had been part of my healing process, a way to help other women who were walking the same difficult path. I started paying attention to how he treated you during the divorce proceedings. Donovan continued. The manipulation, the financial games, the way he turned your children against you. And I decided I wanted to help. Help, how I whispered. At first, just by documenting his behavior, I started working in his building personally so I could observe him, record his conversations, gather evidence of the kind of man he really was. I thought maybe someday that information might be useful to you. He reached over and gently touched my face, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. But then I started following you sometimes just to make sure you were okay. I saw you struggling. Saw you skipping meals to make your budget stretch. Saw you walking to work in the rain because your car had broken down and you couldn't afford to fix it. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. You saw all that. I saw a woman who was barely surviving because her ex-husband had systematically destroyed her life. And I decided I couldn't just watch anymore. So I started helping. Helping, how I asked again, though. Part of me was starting to suspect the answer. Your rent, he said simply. For the past 6 months, I've been paying the difference between what you could afford and what you actually owed. You thought your landlord gave you a break on the monthly payment, but it was me making up the difference. My mouth fell open. 6 months, but that's thousands of dollars. $3,600 to be exact, he said. Plus car repairs, grocery bills, utility payments when you were short. I had people keeping an eye on your accounts, making sure you never knew. I felt like the world was tilting on its axis. Why would you do that? We weren't even dating then. Because you reminded me of my mother, he said quietly. The words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Your mother. She was married to my father for 22 years. He was charming, successful, respected in the community. He was also controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. She spent 2 decades believing she was worthless, that she was lucky he tolerated her, that she could never survive without him. Donovan's voice grew rougher as he continued. When she finally found the courage to leave, he made sure she got nothing. He hid assets, bribed lawyers, turned her own children against her. She spent the last 10 years of her life living in poverty, convinced she deserved nothing better. What happened to her? She died alone in a studio apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and photos of grandchildren she wasn't allowed to see. His hands clenched into fists. I was building my business then, starting to make real money, but she was too proud to accept help from me. She said she didn't want to be a burden. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. So when you saw Porter doing the same thing to me, I saw my mother, he finished. I saw another woman being destroyed by a man who should have protected her. And I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. Not if I could prevent it. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his confession settling between us. I understood now why he'd hidden his wealth, why he'd approached me so carefully, why he'd been content to let me set the pace of our relationship. The grocery store, I said suddenly that day when you helped me with my bags. I'd been working up the courage to approach you for weeks, he admitted. When I saw you struggling with those heavy bags, it seemed like fate giving me an opportunity. And everything since then, the way you've been with me, the way you've treated me, all genuine, he said firmly. Every moment, every feeling, every word I've said to you has been real. The only thing I hid was the money, and only because I needed to know that you could love me without it. I looked out at the lake, watching the Christmas lights dance on the water, trying to process everything he told me. 6 months of secretly paying my bills. Months of careful investigation into Porter's behavior. A lifetime of wealth hidden behind workload and a modest truck. I have one more confession, Donovan said softly. I turned to look at him, not sure I could handle any more revelations. When I said I owned 17 cleaning companies, that was conservative. Mitchell Enterprises owns or has significant stakes in 43 different businesses across 5 states. The company is worth approximately $68 million. The number was so large, it didn't seem real. $68 million. It was more money than I could even conceptualize, more than entire countries' budgets. And you've been letting me worry about whether I could afford to split dinner checks, I said weakly. I've been falling in love with a woman who worried about dinner checks, but still gave her last $20 to a homeless veteran outside the restaurant, he corrected. I've been falling in love with someone who has more character and strength than anyone I've ever met. He reached for my hands again, and this time I didn't pull away. Francine, I know this is overwhelming. I know you probably feel deceived and confused, but I need you to know that everything I've done, every secret I've kept has been because I love you, because I wanted to protect you and give you the space to heal without pressure or expectation. I looked into his eyes, the same kind eyes that had comforted me through panic attacks and held me while I cried about my children's rejection. The same gentle hands that had taught me how to change a tire and helped me carry groceries. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, bringing my hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. You decide if you can forgive me for the deception. You decide if you can trust me despite the secrets. And you decide if you want to build a life with someone who will never let you face Porter's cruelty alone again. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out and saw Sarah's name on the screen. Mom, we need to talk. Can I come see you tomorrow? There are things about Dad that I never knew. Things I need to apologize for. I showed the message to Donovan, who smiled with quiet satisfaction. It's starting, he said. They're finally seeing the truth, for the first time in hours. I smiled back. Yes, I said. I think they are. Sarah arrived at my apartment the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock, clutching a cardboard tray of coffee from the expensive shop downtown and wearing the kind of careful makeup that couldn't quite hide the fact she'd been crying. I watched her through my kitchen window as she sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage or rehearsing words I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. When she finally knocked, I opened the door to find my 34-year-old daughter looking more uncertain than I'd seen her since she was a child. "Mom," she said, holding up the coffee tray like a peace offering, "I brought your favorite, the vanilla latte with extra foam." It was such a simple gesture, but it hit me with unexpected force. Sarah remembered my coffee order. After years of distance and casual cruelty, she still remembered something that small about who I was. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let her enter my modest living room. She looked around the space I'd called home for 4 years, and I saw her taking in details she'd never bothered to notice during her rare visits. The secondhand furniture arranged to maximize the small space. The photographs covering one wall, pictures of my children at various ages, school events she'd probably forgotten I'd attended, family moments from before everything fell apart. "You kept all of these?" she said softly, stopping in front of a photo of her high school graduation. "Of course I kept them. You're my children." She turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Even after the way we've treated you, it wasn't a question." We both knew how the last 4 years had gone. The missed birthday calls, the obligatory holiday visits that felt more like duty than desire. The casual dismissal of my feelings and opinions, the gradual erosion of a relationship that had once been the center of my world. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Tell me what you came to say." Sarah perched on the edge of the cushion like she was ready to flee at any moment. She opened one of the coffee cups and handed it to me, then clutched her own like a lifeline. "I read through the financial documents Donovan gave me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of them, every bank statement, every canceled check, every transfer record." She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out the manila envelope, now thick with sticky notes and highlighted sections. "Mom, I had no idea. I knew Dad controlled the money during your marriage, but I thought that was normal. I thought that was just how marriages worked." "What did you find?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the details of my own financial exploitation laid out in black and white. "Everything," she said, her voice breaking. "The money from your catering business that he funneled into his personal accounts. The inheritance from Grandma Patterson that he told you went to taxes, but actually went into investments in his name only. The life insurance policy he cashed out without telling you. Each revelation felt like a fresh wound, but also like validation. For years, I'd questioned my own memories, wondered if I was imagining the financial manipulation or being overly suspicious. But the worst part," Sarah continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, "was reading his notes about your divorce strategy. He kept detailed records of how to minimize your settlement, how to make you look unstable or unreliable to the judge." She pulled out a handwritten document that I recognized as Porter's careful script. "He wrote down things you said during arguments, but twisted them to make you sound irrational. He documented every time you forgot something or made a mistake, building a case that you weren't capable of managing money or making decisions." My hands shook as I reached for the document. Seeing my private pain reduced to bullet points in my ex-husband's handwriting felt like being violated all over again. "And then there are the recordings," Sarah said quietly. "What recordings? Donovan didn't play all of them last night. There are hours of conversations Dad had with his lawyer, with his partners, with..." She swallowed hard, "with Jennifer. They talked about you like you were an obstacle to overcome, a problem to solve." Sarah sat down her coffee and moved closer to me on the couch. "In one recording, Dad's lawyer asks if he's sure about pushing for such a low alimony payment. Dad laughs and says, 'It doesn't matter because you'll probably remarry quickly anyway, that you're the type who can't survive alone.' The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Porter had known exactly how little $800 a month was to live on. He'd counted on my desperation to drive me into another relationship where I'd become someone else's financial responsibility. But when you didn't remarry, Sarah continued, when you just kept struggling and surviving on your own. He started to get angry. There's a recording from 18 months ago where he tells Jennifer that your independence is making him look bad, that people are starting to ask questions about why his ex-wife is living in poverty while he's planning an expensive wedding. Is that why he started being cruel? I asked. Why he encouraged you kids to distance yourselves even more? Sarah nodded miserably. He told us you were trying to manipulate us, that you were playing the victim to make him look like a monster. He said you were probably lying about your financial situation to get sympathy. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my pride and asked one of my children for help. Small things like a ride to the doctor when my car broke down or borrowing money for groceries when an unexpected bill depleted my account. Each request had been met with eye rolls, lectures about budgeting, suggestions that I was being dramatic or irresponsible. We believed him, Sarah whispered. We wanted to believe him because it was easier than accepting that our father was capable of that kind of cruelty. A knock at the door interrupted us. Through the peephole, I could see Michael and David standing on my doorstep, both looking as uncomfortable as Sarah had. "Did you call them?" I asked. Sarah shook her head. "We all agreed to come separately. I guess they couldn't wait either." I opened the door to find my sons holding a bag from the bakery. I used to love the expensive one near Porter's house that I hadn't been able to afford in years. "Mom," Michael said awkwardly, "can we come in?" I stepped aside, and suddenly, my small living room felt crowded with the weight of years of unspoken resentment and misunderstanding. David looked around the space with the same surprise Sarah had shown, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "We've been talking all night," Michael said, without preamble. "About the recordings, about the financial documents, about things we should have noticed years ago. Like what I asked, settling back onto the couch while they arranged themselves around the room. Like the fact that you never badmouthed Dad to us," David said quietly. "Even during the worst parts of the divorce, even when you had every right to tell us what he'd done, you never tried to turn us against him. While he spent years systematically destroying your reputation with us, Michael added his lawyer's mind, clearly working through the implications. He violated basic principles of co-parenting and human decency. I looked at my 3 adult children, really looked at them and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Shame, regret, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of understanding." "There's something else," Sarah said, glancing at her brothers before continuing. "We called Dad this morning." My stomach clenched. "And he tried to convince us that Donovan was lying, that the documents were forged, that the recordings were taken out of context," Michael said. "But when we pressed him for details, when we asked specific questions about transactions and dates, he hung up on us," David finished. "Just like he used to hang up on you when you questioned his decisions during the marriage. And then Jennifer called Sarah back an hour later." Michael continued. "Apparently Dad had some kind of breakdown after our conversation. He's been drinking since last night, ranting about how Donovan is trying to ruin him." "Jennifer's scared," Sarah said softly. "She asked if I thought Dad might be dangerous when he's been drinking." A chill ran down my spine. Porter had never been physically violent during our marriage, but his emotional cruelty had intensified when he'd been drinking. And if he felt cornered now, if he saw his carefully constructed image crumbling, "You need to be careful, Mom," Michael said, his voice taking on a protective tone I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "If Dad blames you for his problems with Donovan, if he thinks you're behind the exposure of his behavior, he might do something stupid." David finished. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Donovan's name appeared on the screen and I answered immediately. "Sweetheart," his voice was calm but urgent. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Porter showed up at my office building this morning drunk and making threats. Security removed him, but I think you should stay somewhere else tonight." "What kind of threats?" I asked, aware that my children were listening to every word. "He accused me of stealing you from him, of manipulating you against your family. He said he was going to make me pay for destroying his life." Donovan paused. "Francine, he's not rational right now. I don't think he'd hurt you physically, but emotional manipulation is his specialty, and desperate people do desperate things." I looked around at my children, seeing genuine concern on their faces for the first time in years. "I'll be okay," I said. "I'm not alone." "Good. I'm having a security company install a system in your building today, and I've arranged for someone to keep an eye on things until Porter calms down." After I hung up, silence settled over the room. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We failed you, didn't we?" she said quietly. "For years, we failed you as children, as human beings. You were manipulated." I replied, though the words felt inadequate for the pain of the last 4 years. "That's not an excuse," Michael said firmly. "We're adults. We should have asked questions, should have looked closer, should have given you the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming Dad's version of events was gospel truth." David stood up and walked to the wall of photographs, stopping in front of a picture of himself at 10 years old, grinning, gap-toothed, in a Little League uniform. "I remember this game. Dad couldn't make it because of work, but you were there. You were always there. You worked 2 jobs during high school to help pay for my car." Sarah added, her voice thick with emotion. "You never made me feel guilty about it. Never made it seem like a sacrifice, but it must have been so hard. And when I graduated law school," Michael said slowly, "you were so proud. You kept telling everyone at the party that your son was going to be a lawyer. But Dad barely acknowledged it, because he was angry that I hadn't joined his firm immediately." They were remembering now, seeing past the narrative Porter had crafted to the reality of their childhood. Seeing me not as the villain in their father's story, but as the woman who had loved them unconditionally despite everything. "Can you forgive us?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "I know we don't deserve it, but can you find a way to forgive us?" I looked at my 3 children, still beautiful to me, despite everything. Still the babies I'd once rocked to sleep, and the teenagers I'd worried about, and the adults I'd hoped would choose kindness over convenience. "I never stopped loving you," I said simply. "Even when you broke my heart, even when you chose him over me, I never stopped being your mother." Sarah collapsed into tears, then the kind of ugly cathartic sobbing that comes from years of suppressed guilt and recognition. Michael sat down heavily in my armchair, his head in his hands. David continued staring at the photographs, his shoulders shaking with silent emotion. "What do we do now?" Michael asked finally. "How do we fix this?" "You start by making different choices," I said. "You start by treating me like family instead of an obligation. You start by building relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation." And Dad, David asked, "What do we do about him?" I thought about Porter alone and drunk and raging against the consequences of his own actions. For a moment, I felt something that might have been pity, but only for a moment. "You make your own decisions about your father," I said. "I won't try to turn you against him the way he turned you against me, but I also won't pretend that what he did was acceptable or that it doesn't have consequences." Sarah wiped her eyes and reached for my hands. "We want to start over, if you'll let us. We want to earn back your trust and prove that we can be the children you deserved." For the first time in 4 years, I felt something I thought was lost forever. Hope. Outside my apartment window, storm clouds were gathering, promising the kind of winter weather that made everything feel cold and uncertain. But inside, surrounded by my children and their tentative offers of reconciliation, I felt warm. The healing wouldn't be instant or easy. Trust once broken took time to rebuild. But for the first time since my divorce, I wasn't facing the future alone. And somewhere across town, Porter was discovering that actions have consequences, and that the people he'd manipulated and controlled were finally free to make their own choices. It was a beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the garden of Donovan's estate. Our estate, I corrected myself, still getting used to the idea, watching my grandson take his first tentative steps across the perfectly manicured lawn. Sarah and her husband had driven down from Seattle for the weekend part of a tradition we'd established of monthly family gatherings that actually felt like family. "He's going to be walking before his first birthday," Sarah said, settling beside me on the stone bench that overlooked the rose garden. "Just like you said Michael did. It still amazed me sometimes." These casual references to shared memories that my children had spent years pretending didn't exist. The gradual rebuilding of our relationships hadn't been easy. There had been awkward conversations, tentative apologies, and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But we'd all committed to doing the work, and slowly, something real had emerged from the ruins of Porter's manipulation. Grandma Francine, 2-year-old Emma, called from the swing set where Michael was pushing her higher than her mother would probably approve of. "Come push me too." "Come, sweetheart," I called back. But Sarah caught my arm before I could stand. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her expression serious. "It's about Dad." My stomach tightened automatically. Even after 6 months of peace, Porter's name still had the power to trigger that old anxiety response. "What about him?" "The wedding's been called off," Sarah said quietly. "Jennifer left him last week." I tried to feel some emotion about this news. Satisfaction, perhaps, or pity, but mostly I felt nothing. Porter's relationship dramas were no longer my concern. What happened? According to Jennifer, he'd been drinking heavily since Christmas night, getting paranoid, making accusations, becoming increasingly controlling. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "She said he'd become obsessed with you and Donovan, convinced that you were plotting against him." "Were there any specific incidents?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "He showed up drunk at my house 2 months ago, demanding to know why I was choosing you over him. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about choosing sides, he started screaming about how Donovan had brainwashed all of us." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of a text message. Then he started sending things like this. The message was from Porter's number. "Your mother destroyed this family with her selfishness and lies. Don't let her poison your children against their grandfather." He sent similar messages to Michael and David. Sarah continued. "Always late at night, always when he'd been drinking. Jennifer said he'd spend hours ranting about how successful and happy you seemed, how it wasn't fair that you'd landed on your feet while he was struggling." "Is he struggling?" I asked, genuinely curious. Porter had always been successful by conventional measures. Wealthy, respected in his profession, surrounded by the trappings of achievement. "His law practice is falling apart," Sarah said bluntly. Losing Donovan's cleaning contract was just the beginning. Word gets around in the legal community, and apparently, Porter's reputation for treating support staff badly made other service providers reluctant to work with his firm. She shifted on the bench, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say next. "And then there are the other consequences of those recordings." "What kind of consequences?" "The Bar Association opened an investigation into his conduct. Nothing criminal, but enough to damage his professional standing. Several clients have moved their business elsewhere. His partners are considering forcing him out." I thought about the man I'd been married to for 35 years, the one who'd built his identity around professional success and social status. For someone like Porter, professional humiliation would be worse than any financial loss. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, genuinely wanting to know. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching her son toddle across the grass with determination. "I feel like he brought it on himself," she said finally. "I feel like maybe if he'd faced consequences for his behavior years ago, he might have learned to treat people better." "And you're not angry with Donovan for causing those consequences?" "No," she said firmly. "I'm grateful. Dad needed to be stopped, and none of us had the courage or the knowledge to do it ourselves." Footsteps on the garden path made us both look up. Donovan was walking toward us, having finished his conference call with the architects designing the new community center we were funding. Even after 6 months of marriage, the sight of him still made my heart skip. Not because of his wealth, though I'd be lying if I said financial security wasn't a relief after years of struggle, but because of the way he looked at me, like I was valuable, like I mattered. "How are my favorite ladies?" he asked, settling on the bench beside me and automatically taking my hand. "Sarah was just updating me on Porter's situation," I said. Donovan's expression grew serious. "I heard about Jennifer leaving." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that affects you too." It was such a thoughtful response, acknowledging that Porter's problems had ripple effects on people who still cared about him despite his flaws. This was one of the things I loved most about Donovan, his ability to see the complexity in situations, to understand that even justified consequences could cause collateral pain. "Actually," Sarah said, "I wanted to ask you both something. We're worried about Dad's drinking about him being alone in that big house. Michael thinks we should stage some kind of intervention." Donovan looked at me questioningly. This was one of the things that had changed since our marriage. He never made decisions about my family without consulting me. Never assumed he knew what was best for relationships that predated his involvement in my life. "What do you think?" I asked Sarah. "Do you think an intervention would help, or would it just give him another opportunity to manipulate all of you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me thinks we owe it to him to try. He's still our father, despite everything. And part of me thinks he'll only change if he wants to change, and that all our intervention will do is give him ammunition to use against us later." It was a mature assessment. The kind of clear-eyed view of Porter that would have been impossible 6 months ago when my children were still under the spell of his carefully crafted narrative. "Here's what I think," I said slowly. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you without considering what I might want or how it might affect me. Your relationship with your father is separate from my relationship with you." "But we want your opinion," Sarah pressed. "We value your judgment now." The phrase, "we value your judgment now," hit me with unexpected force. For so many years, my opinions had been dismissed, my insights ignored, my concerns brushed aside. To have my adult children actively seeking my perspective felt like a gift I hadn't dared hope for. My opinion is that Porter needs professional help. Therapy, addiction counseling, maybe both, but he has to want that help. You can't force someone to change who doesn't see a problem with their behavior. "And if he does want help," Sarah asked, "then you support him while maintaining appropriate boundaries. You don't let him use his problems as an excuse to abuse you emotionally. You don't sacrifice your own well-being or your family's well-being to enable his dysfunction." Donovan squeezed my hand approvingly. "Your mother has gotten very wise about dealing with toxic people," he said with a slight smile. "I had a good teacher," I replied, squeezing back. The sound of car doors slamming made us all look toward the front of the house. Michael and David had arrived with their families, and within minutes, the peaceful garden was filled with the chaos of children playing and adults catching up. This was what family was supposed to feel like, I thought, watching my sons set up an impromptu soccer game while their wives chatted about work and kids and ordinary life concerns. Not the careful performance Porter had always demanded, where everyone played their assigned roles to maintain his image of perfection, just real people being real with each other. Francine David called from across the lawn. "Emma wants to know if you'll read her the story about the brave princess again. The one where the princess saves herself," I called back. "That's the one." I excused myself from Sarah and Donovan and went to settle under the oak tree with Emma and her favorite book. A story about a princess who used her intelligence and courage to solve her own problems instead of waiting for rescue. "Why is this your favorite story?" I asked Emma as she snuggled against my side. "Because the princess is smart and she doesn't give up," Emma said, with the absolute certainty that only 2-year-olds possessed. "And because she makes her own happy ending," I added. "Yeah, she doesn't need a prince. She's brave all by herself." As I read about the clever princess outwitting the dragon and saving her kingdom, I thought about my own fairy tale ending. Not the traditional kind where Prince Charming rescues the helpless maiden, but the better kind where the woman saves herself and then finds a partner who values her strength. The sun was setting by the time our guests started gathering their things and preparing to leave. As always, there were promises to call during the week, plans for the next gathering. The easy intimacy of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Thank you," Michael said as he hugged me goodbye. "For not giving up on us, for showing us how to be better." "Thank you for letting me love you again," I replied. After everyone left, Donovan and I walked through the house, turning off lights and setting the security system. It still felt surreal sometimes living in a place that could have housed 3 families comfortably. But Donovan had made it clear from the beginning that this was our home, not his house, that I was privileged to occupy. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said as we settled into bed. "I was thinking about Emma's story," I said. "About brave princesses and happy endings. And I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago. How different I am." Donovan turned to face me in the dim light filtering through our bedroom windows. "Different? How stronger? More confident? More myself, I suppose." I paused, trying to articulate feelings that were still new and sometimes surprising. When I was married to Porter, I spent so much energy trying to be the wife he wanted that I forgot who I actually was. And after the divorce, I was so broken that I couldn't imagine ever being whole again. "But you were always strong," Donovan said gently. "You survived 35 years of emotional abuse and still had enough compassion left to volunteer at a women's shelter. You rebuilt your life from nothing and never became bitter or cruel despite having every reason to be. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a failure because Porter spent decades convincing you that survival wasn't enough, that you had to be grateful for the scraps he threw you." His voice hardened slightly. He almost succeeded in destroying something beautiful and irreplaceable. "But he didn't succeed," I pointed out. "And now my children see who he really is. Now they understand what really happened during our marriage. Do you think they'll try the intervention? Probably. And it will probably fail, at least initially. Porter won't change until he's lost everything that matters to him. His career, his reputation, his relationships with his children. Does that make you sad?" I considered the question seriously. It makes me sad for the man he could have been if he'd chosen differently. It makes me sad for my children who have to watch their father self-destruct. But it doesn't make me sad for myself. I'm finally free of his chaos. Donovan pulled me closer and I settled against his chest with the kind of contentment I'd never experienced in my first marriage. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe, supportive, based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than power and control. "I have something to tell you," Donovan said softly. More secrets, I teased, but there was no anxiety in the question anymore. Good news this time. The community center project got final approval from the city planning board. Construction starts next month. The community center had been my idea, a place where women leaving abusive relationships could access job training, childcare, legal aid, and counseling services all in one location. Donovan had enthusiastically supported the project, donating both the land and the construction costs. "That's wonderful," I said. "I can't wait to see it take shape. I was thinking we should name it after someone who exemplifies the kind of strength and resilience we want to celebrate. Did you have someone in mind?" "Actually, I was hoping you'd let us call it the Francine Mitchell Center for Women's Independence." I pulled back to look at him in surprise. "You want to name it after me?" "I want to name it after the woman who showed me what real courage looks like. The woman who survived something that would have broken most people and came out the other side with her kindness and compassion intact." Tears pricked at my eyes. "Donovan, that's too much. I'm not a hero." You're wrong about that, he said firmly. You're exactly the kind of hero those women will need to see. Someone who proves that survival is possible, that rebuilding is possible, that finding happiness again is possible. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, standing outside Porter's house with a cheap bottle of wine and a desperate hope for reconciliation. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this security, this sense of purpose and belonging. Okay, I said softly. If you think it will help other women, then yes, let's do it. There's one more thing, Donovan said, reaching into his nightstand drawer. I know we're already married, but I wanted to give you this. He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Not an enormous diamond like the one Porter had given me all those years ago, but something more meaningful. The central stone was surrounded by smaller gems that spelled out a word in different colors. Brave. It's perfect, I whispered, sliding it onto my finger next to my simple wedding band. Just like you, he replied. As we settled into sleep, I thought about fairy tales and happy endings, about brave princesses and the different kinds of rescuing that actually matter, about the difference between being saved and being supported, between being controlled and being cherished. Outside our bedroom window, the city lights twinkled like scattered stars. And somewhere in that darkness, Porter was probably drinking alone and raging against the consequences of his own choices. But that was his story to write now. Mine was just beginning. In the morning, there would be plans to make for the community center calls with contractors and architects and city planners. There would be Sunday brunch with my children and grandchildren, easy conversations about ordinary things, the slow repair of relationships built on honesty instead of manipulation. There would be a life worth living surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. And there would be love, real love, the kind that made me stronger rather than smaller, braver rather than more fearful. At 62, I had finally learned the difference between being wanted and being treasured. It had been worth the wait. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until